Do you talk with people about your emotions a lot?
Okay. All right. I mean, this is where I start to get angry, so I'm going to try to not go full tilt. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Bloom the Podcast Season 3. Thank you all so much for tuning in to another episode. I am your host, Donovan, and I'm so happy that you guys are here tuning in for another episode of your favorite Christian podcast. And again, today we have another solo podcast. I'm back in the studio all by my lonesome, but we're gonna have a fun one today. I have a really special episode planned out for you guys today. A lot of stuff that I want to cover, and we'll get through all of it, so don't you worry. If you're tuning in for the first time, thank you so much for stopping by. I hope you enjoy. Don't forget to leave a like, comment, and subscribe after you finish watching the video. If you guys are returning guests or want to watch our last episode, the last one we did was with Aiden Lee, a returning guest. We talked about the lies of the self-love movement. It was a really fun episode. I love Aiden. He's a super fun guest. We had some really good talk about that topic. So if you guys are interested in that, go ahead and check that out. I'm also going to be leaving another video in the description, which would be our first episode of Season 3. I'm going to be kind of bouncing off that topic today, which is why I think it'll be really fun. If you guys missed our season premiere of Season 3, I was on a Jubilee video. I was on a panel debating about feminism, why it's bad, why it's good, what are the pros and cons, all that stuff. And I did a little riff off that video here on the podcast, breaking down my answers, breaking down what I believe to be the highs and lows of the feminist movement and why I think it's been extremely negative for society and especially Christians. And a lot of that video was focused primarily, obviously, on feminism, so it had a lot to do with the impact of women. I think in that video as well, we did touch on quite a bit how this does affect men in different ways. But I think it's important that we drill in on the men's role of feminism as well. Obviously, feminism can't stand without men allowing it to stand. Regardless of whether we like it or not, or whether we want it or not, or whether we lead or not, God has placed men in a position of leadership. And what that looks like to different people is how that fleshes itself out. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. It's going to be masculinity, leadership, and the duties of being a man. And I think in correlation to last video, it's really important. Like I said, feminism can't stand without men, and men need to be leading and making sure movements like this don't start. And there's a bunch of reasons why we could get into, and I did a lot on the last video like this, so if you want to go back and look at it before you watch this one, feel free. But it's just really important to drill in on men's role in this and how we've let this kind of spiral out of control, especially in the church. I think it's important that we drill into parenting, that we drill into church leaders, that we drill into friendships, husbands, all that stuff, because it affects the church on a very, very deep and real level that I don't think most people are really acknowledging. We've adopted language, we've adopted terms, we've adopted thought processes, all from the feminist movement that the men have allowed to come into the world and come into the church. So we're going to be talking about that today. So I hope you're intrigued. I hope I piqued your interest on this topic. I found a really interesting video. That's kind of a bit of an exaggeration. I Columbused a video of Vice. I'm sure you guys know the YouTube channel Vice, kind of similar to Jubilee in the sense that they have panels of diverse groups of people and they discuss hot social issues. And on this Vice episode, we have a panel of, it looks like 8 men that are all discussing what it means to be a man, what masculinity looks like, and what the world should do about toxic masculinity. They cover a whole wide range of topics in this video. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. It's about 45 minutes. I'll leave the link to it in the description if you guys want to check it out. I'm kind of just going to riff on some of the parts that I think are important and some of the parts that I think I see most prevalent in day-to-day and also in church. So I think it'll be fun. I'm just going to stop and go, very similar to what I did the first time. And we're just going to be breaking this stuff down. So if you guys are ready, buckle up, because it's going to be a bumpy ride. We've got a lot to say. Like I said before, I might put that on a shirt. There's a lot to say. Or how did I say it the first time? I'm blanking. I'm stupid. I said there's a lot to say and a lot that's been said. Something like that. We're going to roll with it. So jumping straight into the video, we're going to start here. And we're going to just roll straight through. I'll be stopping and going. So, yeah, we'll let this ride out.
I wanted to start by telling you why this is something that I'm interested in. I have an 8-year-old son, and I'm seeing him absorb what manliness might mean. I'm thinking to myself, what does it mean to be a man?
So right off the bat, I know we're only 15 seconds in, but I think it's really important that we talk about what he just said, right? One of the reasons that he's interested in this topic is because he has a son, and his son is looking out into the world and trying to find out what it means to be a man and what it means to be masculine and all these things. And I think a lot of people feel the same way. And I know I've talked to people, friends and stuff like that, where they feel the same way. I never really had that thought. And I think that's ultimately due to the blessing of having a really biblical father, which seems to be the most criminally underrated blessing in the entire universe. But I mean, it's crazy. I had a dad that modeled masculinity in a very biblical and practical way. And I'll get a little bit more into that. We're going to cover fathers and parenting in a little bit. But I just think it's really interesting that this video frames the conversation from a perspective of what are kids seeing in masculinity these days. Now, while that is a valid point, and there's obviously going to be leaders that are showing people what masculinity is, whether that's through social media, whether that's teachers, whether that's political officials or celebrities or whatever it may be, we're going to be pushing a version of masculinity. And what is that version? And I think that just all the more falls on the parents to show what that is. I also think it's interesting because in the Jubilee video that I was on, one of the prompts that they actually cut out, and I can only imagine why, is Andrew Tate. And they were asking, is Andrew Tate a good role model for boys looking up to see masculinity? And I couldn't help myself from thinking, because one of the main arguments from the feminist side of the table was, I don't want my kids seeing him and making him think that that's what men are supposed to be like. And my first reply is, if you are not parenting your kid and all he can get is YouTube from some entertainer, and that's what he gets as masculinity, then out of all the people he could get, that's not the worst thing in the world. He could have Lil Nas X, or he could have all these other insane psychos that say you can be a woman, that men can get pregnant, all this other crazy stuff. But it's just absolutely wild that that is the talking point. It's like, if you don't want your kid looking at Andrew Tate videos on YouTube, that's why you're the parent. You get to enforce how that works. So I think it was really interesting that they were really quick to throw away parenting responsibility for their kid when it comes to consuming what is masculine, what isn't masculine, and just media in general. There wasn't much of a fight to be put up for parenting in that respect. So yeah, we're going to go ahead and keep going here. So what we're going to get into is the men introducing themselves and giving their brief take on what they think masculinity means to them.
To start, maybe we could just introduce each other to each other. And if you were to describe what it means to be a man or to be masculine.
My name is Tahoe. I'm a black man from the hood. When I was young, being a man, you had to be tough. You had to be hard. And now, to me, being a man is a lot different. Now, to me, being a man is knowing when to be soft. Knowing that you don't always have to run the charge. You can actually listen. You know what I mean? So things have changed a lot over the course of the years for me.
I'm Griffin, and I don't identify as a man. I'm non-binary. I still have elements of, my identity that are masculine, elements that are feminine, elements that don't fall within that range.
That's beautiful.
And
I feel tied to it.
I personally just don't feel tied to like the norms or the confines of gender at all.
Well, welcome.
My name is Dylan, and I think that the notion of masculinity is just something that can be possessed by man or woman. Man, woman, non-gender conforming person. What it means to be masculine is just like, changing and like very fluid.
Okay, I mean, there's a lot already there that we can delve into. I want to talk about first what the first guy said, where he said being a man used to be being about being tough and being strong and responsibility and, taking charge. Now he thinks masculinity is about being soft and knowing when to step back. Where does that come from? Who told us that that was a good thing that we need to do? Who told men that being soft is now the new masculine? I know who's saying that. Obviously, that's the feminist movement pushing its way and projecting itself onto what men need to be. It's always going to be a scale thing. As feminism pushes for women to be more masculine, naturally the men are going to become more feminine if they don't stand in their leadership role and sort things out. So we're seeing this scale tip where now all these men are thinking that they have to be soft, they have to be feminine, they have to know when to let someone else take charge for them, when they need to abdicate their leadership and abdicate their responsibility. There's so much of that going on. And I just think it's really sad that we have videos like this and where characters like this guy are projected to be like emotionally mature and emotionally stable, because now they know that manliness isn't about being tough and about being strong. It's about being soft and crying and doing all this random stuff and emoting like a chick. Like, where does that come from? And I think the church needs to be very careful about letting this in, because while I do think it is important that men learn how to express themselves, I think how they do that is a whole different conversation, and we'll cover that in a little bit. Obviously, you have the transgender man on here who claims he doesn't identify as man, he's non-binary, whatever the heck that means. And again, these are just more emotional appeals that have started to ruin masculinity. We see that he doesn't want to claim any masculine traits because masculinity has been deemed as a bad word. It's been deemed as a toxic thing. It's been deemed as all this, it has all this negative stigma surrounding it, where to want to be masculine or to identify as masculine or to exhibit masculine traits is now like a icky thing to do, which I think is an extremely sad thing, because the way that God designed men to be masculine and to be providers and to be protectors and all the things that come with that, I think is a beautiful thing, especially in correlation to women and the offset that happens, how that happens. So to see the world take this really staunch, just rigid, aggressive, hit piece on masculinity is just extremely sad. Then you have the last guy, and this is where egalitarianism and equality and all this stuff starts to kind of funnel itself into this conversation. He says masculinity is a trait that's inherited by men or women. It doesn't really matter how you identify. It's all about how you show up. And while there is a little bit of truth to that, you can have slightly more masculine women, which is what we're seeing predominantly in the West, and slightly more feminine men predominantly in the West. That's not what it's supposed to be. So if we're asking what is masculinity, it's not just something that's inherited by random human beings, whatever they feel like being that day. We have to be very careful about not falling into the trap of feel. Everything's feelings. Everything's not feelings. There is realities to the world that God designed. God is a God of order, and he designed things a specific way. So all this talk about feelings throws God's design completely out the window and just moves all of our prideful, emotional ideals to the forefront, which is extremely damaging. But we'll continue. There's a couple more guys that actually are going to introduce themselves.
What's up, guys? My name is Paul. I'm a fitness entrepreneur. I'm an immigrant. I came here when I was 4 years old with my family. It's kind of funny how we're talking about it. My take on masculinity is not about talking as much as doing. I think at its core, a man has to be efficient, competent, and be willing to do what it takes for themselves and their loved ones.
I was not always a good man. I was not always what you would call a healthy masculine man. And so as my life has changed, I've identified 5 points that I think make a truly masculine man masculine.
Okay.
I think point number 1 is a man who walks with God. Point number 2 is a man who stands on principle. Point number 3, which is a masculine man, is self-sacrificing. So someone who is willing to sacrifice for point 4, the people that he leads. A true man is a leader. And number 5, a masculine man is never a coward.
That's a lot there.
Yeah.
Let's get into that as we go on.
It's too much to
I
digest.
think what it means to be a man is responsibility. As a man, it can come with a lot of power, and with great power comes great responsibility. In short words,
Yeah, we got Spider-Man over here.
that's it.
You love
That's from Spider-Man, I think.
Yeah,
right?
that's what's
Uncle Ben.
horny dog.
James.
Well, my name is James Killen, former United States Marine turned Air Force officer. Got a couple combat tours, but I'm also a father of 3 girls who mellowed me out. The idea of masculinity is something that I find interesting because it is changing, and I can actually see those changes in myself. And I think that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this panel.
Thanks for your service. Andre.
Hey, what's up? Yeah, men. I think my idea of a real man is, someone that gets the job done, and provides and all that. I don't even know what that means anymore, but I don't know. It's changing every day.
Okay, we're going to stop there before we get into the next point. A lot there to unpack. I really like what the first guy in the second bit, or the third guy, starts with. How a man is efficient, a man gets the job done, there's responsibility there. There is an inherent sense of duty that comes with being a man and being masculine, which I think is the way that God designed it to be. If you look at Scripture and the way that God built structured society, you see the way that men are put in the forefront to do those things, to go out and to provide and to create society, to what's the word? To take over the land. I forget what the phrasing is in Genesis when he says to take over the world and to, control the world. The world is in the hands of men. So I think that's a really great starting point. And I think that's something that we'll build upon as the episode continues. I also really liked the Christian guy. I believe he's Christian. I mean, he didn't give a testimony or anything, but he talked about being a God-fearing man. He talked about what he believes are 5 points of a true masculine man. And a lot of what he said, pretty much all of it, is extremely on point. You have to be God-fearing. You have to be sacrificing. You have to be responsible. You can't be a coward. You have to have integrity. There's all those things that are just really good. And it kind of got me thinking of what are some of the ways that I would describe masculinity from a biblical standpoint. And I definitely kept God-fearing in there. I think sacrificial, I think strong, I think of leadership, I think of integrity. Those are just all staples that I think God designed in biblical masculinity to have. If we look at the life of Jesus, we see all of those things. I'll talk a little bit more about that too as we go along, but I think that having those staple values and principles as a man is really important when you're anchoring yourself in what it means to be masculine biblically. So I think with all of the flightiness of the world, and how we kind of just say it's it's a way you feel, it's kind of just how you walk into a room, it's kind of just it's a feeling, and anyone can have it, man or woman. We're detracting away from, again, like I said, the design of masculinity, and we need to anchor ourselves in biblical truths surrounding masculinity. I think of verses like 1 Corinthians 16:13, which says, let's see, I wrote this down. And now I can't find it. Here we go. Be on alert, stand firm in the faith, act like men, be strong. Which goes against exactly what the first guy stated, to be soft and to know when to not lead. Men are never not leading, which is I think is a really important thing for men to understand. You're either leading in action, or you're leading by example, or you're leading in word. So I think it's really important that men understand that. And when it tells us to be strong, to act like men, I mean, it's very straightforward. And I think the world has done a very good job on clouding it. You see that last guy introducing himself saying he doesn't really know what it means. It's changing every day. It has a very misguided understanding of what it means to be masculine, which is extremely saddening. But yeah, I just think, I mean, it's going to get worse as we go on, so buckle up. But yeah, we're going to move on to the first point here that they try to go to, which is all about everyone's favorite pastime, which is cRiSiS masculinity, which is a term that I find to be extremely hilarious. But yeah, we'll cover it.
That says there's a crisis in masculinity. Is there a crisis in masculinity? And if so, like, what is that crisis?
The thing that I see is a lot of deconstructing generational trauma. The be a man, boys don't cry, this, that, and the other thing. And I think that's actually one of the reasons why we see it as a crisis, because we're actually trying to redefine what it means to be a man, and none of us have any idea because we're just out here trying to be whoever we are.
That's right. I think that historically, being a man was rooted in patriarchy and misogyny. And now we realize how harmful that has been over the years. And so we don't really know how to define where we're supposed to be. And I think the reason that they're saying there's a crisis is because the box has gotten so small for just being, say, straight, just being a hetero, right? Because if you do anything, women judge you.
What do you mean anything?
If I dance a certain way, or if I wear my hair a certain way, if I dress a certain way, they go, real men don't do that. Real men don't do that. And so you get scared to move a certain way because you don't want to get judged or outed out of the accepted part of your community. And I think that kind of has us in an uproar, and we don't know where to be. Like, where's the safe place to be for men now? You know what I mean? And it's kind of disturbing.
I was what you would call a toxic masculine male growing up. And I had good men that sewed into me. They gave me good advice. But I never found manhood or never understood my place as a man until one day I humbled myself and I gave my life to the Lord Jesus Christ. And I'm telling you right now, walking with God changed my life forever.
Can you define toxic masculinity? Like,
I would say toxic masculinity is like what he was just saying, where you're using that leadership role or that aggressive nature in a harmful way to harm other people, to get your way. So the biblical structure for manhood is very humble. It's self-sacrifice. It's not self-motivated, but it is motivated by principle and standing on what's right.
So cRiSiS masculinity, I feel like that's one of conservatives' favorite thing to cry about. It's one of liberal and feminist favorite thing to cry about. And I find it funny that we can be in a crisis of masculinity, but yet we don't know or can't even define what masculinity is. We have a room full of 8 men that all described different versions of masculinity. So how can it be in cRiSiS? What exactly is in cRiSiS? Is it traditional masculinity that's in cRiSiS, where you have strong leading men in leadership positions that are respectable and biblical? Because that I would agree with. Or is it these soft new men that were emotionally stable men that are just in touch with their feelings and cry all the time? Is that the crisis of masculinity that we're missing? Which one is it? Because it's extremely unclear. You have the first guy that goes off and says, we're still trying to define what masculinity is. We're deconstructing it. We're redefining it. No, we're not redefining anything. Well, the feminist movement is trying to redefine what masculinity looks like, but we know, like, what the cowboy said. I can't remember his name. I'm just going to start calling him cowboy for the rest of the video. We know that biblical manhood starts on the knee bending down to Christ and humbling ourselves to Christ. And once we do that, now we can see what the picture of masculinity looks like from the scriptures. Without that, we're not redefining anything. We're not going to project all these ridiculous worldly ideologies onto what masculinity is supposed to be. You have the guy that went after him talking about patriarchy and generational traumas and all this stuff that the world loves to use to remove responsibility of doing the things that we know we're supposed to do. We're talking about, I mean, it's all very vague and ambiguous terms that no one can really fill in. When they say trauma, that can be anything. Me stubbing my toe on my couch walking to get some drinks from the refrigerator, is that trauma? What kind of trauma are we referring to? Because they never tell you. They never really fill in the blanks for you. They say it's generational. I would say it's starting to become generational because we're confusing the heck out of men by telling them that they need to be acting a certain way that is not masculine. And now you have all these confused men out here that are purposeless, godless, and have no idea what their masculinity really is and how they can really tap into what biblical masculinity looks like. So I think that's just a really important thing to note out. Again, you hear your common tropes of the feminist movement talk about patriarchy. They'll never define it for you. They'll never tell you what it means. It's just patriarchy, and it caused so much damage to the women and so much damage to the men, and we didn't even know it was causing so much damage to us. And they just go on this whole emotional appeal of why patriarchy has been so bad. And that's it in a nutshell. I mean, the way that word has been thrown out there, I swear, if I hear patriarchy one more time, I'm going to start flipping tables because it is absolutely crazy. And kind of going back to the prompt, right? Like, crisis masculinity has become a thing due to feminism trying to remove men from the equation. It's trying to make women more like men, and we're feeling the crisis of masculinity because we're feeling a crisis of biblical masculinity, and we're removing leadership, we're removing responsibility, and now we're seeing a whole bunch of other problems unravel. So is there a crisis of masculinity? Yes, but definitely not in the terms or in the frame of conversation that they're having. So I think that's really important. And it's interesting too, because you have all these men here that are telling us that it's okay to be soft and okay to do all these things that are contrary. But again, they claim crisis. So it really is just a convenience, I think, of a way of continuing to put men down to raise up women. And men have allowed this to happen by accepting the guilt, the unnecessary, unwarranted guilt that feminism has tried to push onto men for being men. That's really what this is. That's what the frame of conversation is that they're having. They're trying to get men to accept that because you're a man, you are inherently bad, you are inherently dumb, you are inherently part of the patriarchy. You inherently have all these privileges that they can't tell you about. That's what this whole thing is you need to accept it, and you need to pay your reparations, if you will, to feminism for being a man. And we're seeing that all over the place. And it's really important that we don't fall into that trap, because God made masculinity as a beautiful thing. As a beautiful thing. All right, we're going to keep going here.
Because I think a lot of what we think of masculinity is tied into patriarchy, right? Which is to say, like, for the longest period of human history, like, men dominated women and got the lion's share of stuff.
I think a lot of times some people make masculinity into a caricature, like it has to be this alpha bro tough guy.
Exactly.
And I find the low-key guy who, you know, is a really great father and a great husband and maybe not like drinking raw eggs every day to be a lot more masculine than the alpha bro who's going and like banging 20 women per weekend and not a responsible man. I find it more masculine to be a good guy.
I think the background of this is that we are saying that gender is this like real thing that has real ideas and implications. And Griffin, I'm wondering, as someone who identifies as non-binary, how does this conversation strike you?
Well, I think that
kind of becomes like irrelevant whether or not we attribute like having like a good ethical compass to being like masculine. Attributing that to like the gender constructs which we have made up, which are like somewhat pointless, like kind of just feed into needless roles that uphold the patriarchy without even knowing it.
There you go. Patriarchy, 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 patriarchy. I mean, are we for real? Is this real life? Like, sometimes I watch videos like this, and I'm waiting for someone to like kick my door in and be like, "You're being pranked." I'm like, "Are we kidding me?" Like, his framing of the question, a lot of this is based on patriarchy, where we know that men have dominated women for the longest time, since the beginning of time. They've dominated women? What does that even mean? I don't even know how to extrapolate anything helpful from that question. And you can see from the unhelpful answers that are given by these people, we're talking about, the macho guy, and that's what the dude, I think his name's Andre, starts saying like, I think the low-key dad, who's kind of a schlub, just not drinking raw eggs and not having sex with a lot of women, all this stuff. It's like, okay, yeah, we understand from a biblical perspective why that's wrong. But it's weird to see the world try and flip the script on some of these traditionally male or masculine ways of living and try to demonize that as well. Obviously, we don't support that, but it's okay when women do it, which I think is a really interesting thing. So they say, I think the guy who's more masculine is the guy that's at home with his wife and kids, not the guy that's out, banging 20 chicks a weekend. That's what he says, right? But on the flip side, it's totally okay. And we should support and we should empower sexual liberation for women to sleep with whoever they want, whenever they want, however many people in a day, however many people in a week. That's totally okay. You do you, queen. Okay, so is the reverse not also true? Is the more feminine, more good woman the one who's not sleeping around with 20 people a day and at home with her kids? Or are we just trying to take that away from men and flip it onto women and have everyone just extremely confused? Because that's what it feels like. That's exactly what it feels like. You have all this just random BS, because I feel like I was listening to a podcast where they spoke about this, and they were talking about masculinity and when it's promoted and when it's demonized. And anything traditionally masculine is going to be demonized, as we've already discussed. But whenever we're talking about when masculinity is being promoted, it's always in a feminine context. I think of, or the podcast was saying, like, I think of movies like Tooth Fairy or like Game Plan, where you have a really macho masculine guy like Dwayne The Rock Johnson, who has a bunch of muscles and is a huge dude, but he's in a fairy costume and he's dancing around with little girls and he's with his daughter, and it's just a super cute feminine moment. And that's when because he's comfortable enough in his masculinity to put on a tutu and to do ballet and to do all this random stuff. That is when masculinity is promoted the most. You don't see the typical leader masculine role who's willing to get stuff done, who sacrifices, who leads, who provides. That's never promoted. That's always seen as oppressive and as holding women back. So now you have all these men that are wanting to do traditionally masculine things, but they're seeing that as, if I go and get a job and I want to provide for my family, now I'm contributing to the patriarchy, which has been holding women back since the beginning, which has been dominating women since the beginning of time. I mean, we need to get real here. I think we've seen a lot of this even still creep into the church. We have a huge influx of pushing women to go to college, like we talked about on the feminism video, which is not a bad thing. I think it's all right. But I think at the same time, we're bringing this problem into the arena to be prevalent, because what we're doing is we're selling that fear. We're selling that, women need to be financially independent of men because if men have the money and men are controlling, you'll get stuck in a bad marriage. And there's all this fear just being pushed. And now men are saying, okay, so what do I do? Do I become this soft stay-at-home dad who has his wife as the breadwinner? Or what is the proper protocol? Because on one hand, we're told that we need to be strong and we need to be independent and we need to be able to provide. But at the same time, it's viewed as oppressive. So which one is it? I mean, we've got to make a decision. Can't be both. There's no way to do both. So it's just extremely unhelpful. You have the transgender man talking about how attributing traits to masculinity upholds the patriarchy and contributes to what he would call pointless gender roles. I mean, I feel like I don't even really have to get into that, but I mean, I think it's really important at the same time that we clearly define that gender roles need to be enforced and they need to be held, because if we don't, and this is something the cowboy actually says shortly after, if we don't follow our biblical rules, we are forfeiting our God-given responsibility as either man or woman. And I think that's just extremely important because we're seeing that all over the place. We're seeing men who don't want to lead, which what I would call the crisis of masculinity. We're seeing women who want to lead, which is Genesis 3 curse. And we're allowing those two things to marry each other and bleed into our church circles, into our leadership circles, into our work circles, and everything surrounding it. So it's really important that we don't see gender roles as needless and that we don't start falling into this egalitarian, communitarian view of men and women with each other. It's extremely important that we don't do that because it is an easy temptation to fall in, to say, oh yeah, everything should be 50-50. If a girl wants to do it, go ahead. If a guy wants to do it, go ahead. No, that's not how it works. And there are aspects to it which are a little more flexible than others, but on whole, God gave men responsibility. He gave women different responsibilities, and those two things are what need to marry. Not this weird conflated view of masculinity being bad and feminine women being masculine and that being good. We have to get away from that. It's not good. It's social constructionism at its finest, which is I mean, it's the easiest way to absolve yourself of responsibility. If we all just got together and say, gender is a social construct and I can be whatever I want, now you don't have to face your responsibility because it's just a construct. We made it up. It can be whatever you want it to be. So if you want it to be something else where you don't have any responsibility, knock yourself out. Social constructionism is single-handedly sweeping the church off his feet because we've accepted that narrative too. We've said, oh, if you don't feel like it or if you think it's something else, then, it could be, we don't want to offend you. We don't want to draw a line in the sand and say that's wrong. So we're going to let you do your thing in order to preserve unity or to do, whatever it is, whatever coping mechanism it is that we're using to not call out a complete disregard to responsibility and gender roles. It's extremely important. I have a feeling we'll get into this in a little bit as well. But this also just kind of made me think of the nature versus nurture. You know what? I'll save it.
Tell me about your dad.
I'm a first generation kid. My dad is from Guyana. Grew up in very humble beginnings, poor family. First time I remember my dad telling me he loved me was when I was 17. And he was saying he was proud of me because I was about to graduate high school and things like that, I'm appreciative of all the other things, being present as a provider, but in terms of the conversation piece and I want to talk to my dad about, sex or something, or I want to talk to my dad about, this person broke up with me and I'm feeling pretty sad about it. I didn't have those conversations.
So emotional language as part of how you talk to your dad.
Yeah.
And my definition of manhood came solely from my relationship with God. It didn't come from my father. It didn't come from the good influences around me.
Is God a man?
Yeah, and God is a man. And God is a father, and he's a good father. He's a perfect father. And so I think there is a clear definition of manhood where I guess that's where I diverge from everyone else in the room. I believe manhood is clearly defined by God. It is the perfect example of what a man should be.
Yeah, I love everything that this guy is saying, man. I think he's hitting it right on the head. I'm going to rewind a little bit. When we're talking about fathers, you got to really, again, like I said from the very beginning, we're adopting the language. We're adopting the language. It's the language of emotionalism. It's that language of, well, how do you feel about it? And, you know, you got to have emotional talk and you got to have all this stuff. And again, I'm not trying to say that there's anything wrong with that, because I think it's good that men know how to express themselves appropriately. But the problem is we have a feminine primary way of viewing emotion. Men and women are different biologically, physiologically, all those things. And we are different in the way that we express our emotions. So when we're talking about all this, like we need to have emotional talk. Yeah, you do, but we need to define what that looks like. Because when they're talking about emotional talk, they're talking about it the way that women talk about emotional talk. So it's not the same thing. And I think it's really important that we delineate those things and we are very careful with how we talk about emotions as men, because there is a different way that that's done. And I just think it's sad that we've conditioned men to think that if you don't cry at the end of a movie or whatever it may be, that you aren't emotionally stable and you're not properly oriented, and you need to cry more. And it's like, are there other forms of expressing emotion apart from crying that are acceptable to still be emotionally mature? Or do you have to do it the same way that women do? And not that there's anything wrong with crying, not at all. I've cried plenty of times in my life. However, is that my first reaction? Most of the time, no. So I think it's weird that we're pushing this feminine primary lens of expressing emotion onto men, and now we have all these men that are looking for their moms, or I'm sorry, for their dads to be almost like second moms, and it's just really weird. I mean, I've heard this said plenty of times, which I can't agree with more. Like, if they want men to just lean into their emotions, that's what serial killers and school shooters look like. I mean, defaulting to anger as an emotion and just letting that run wild without any checks and balances. Just feed into your emotions. Just feed into bitterness, feed into rage, feed into anger, feed into all those things that are natural proclivities for men. Feed into those things. Just let those things run wild and have emotional talk. Like, what good does that do? What good does that do? It's just, it's crazy. And, I really like where they started, because I think it's important. And I think having like I said before in the very beginning, having a biblical masculine dad is one of the biggest blessings I've ever had in the world. And I just want to spend a little bit of time talking about my dad, because I think he is, for me anyway, obviously this is my experience, extremely subjective on this, but there is no one that I look up to more when it comes to what it means to be manly, and what it means to be a leader, and what it means to be a father, what it means to be a husband, than my dad. I mean, from a very young age, looking at the way that he treated my mom, looking at the way that he treated myself, looking at the way he treated my siblings, even the way he treated our animals. I mean, it's respect, it's diligence, it's discipline, it's integrity, it's sacrificing, it's duty. I mean, the way he is as a friend to all of his friends, he's reliable. The way he is in church, he's a servant. I think of all these traits that the Lord has just blessed my dad with, and he is just an incredible example of what it looks like to embody biblical masculinity. And growing up, it was almost a little bit of pressure, because I feel like my older brother is a lot like my dad in that respect. And, he takes on a lot of those same characteristics. And I love my older brother, again, role model to me. And it was a lot of pressure in my mind to live up and to try and be like that. And I think that that was good when I realized that that pressure is good. And there should be a sense of like, I want to be like that. Because before, when I was a little bit younger, I kind of viewed that and that standard of masculinity and biblical masculinity was intimidating. It was very intimidating. And it wasn't until I had gone through some different experiences that really challenged me that I look back and I say, okay, this makes sense. This standard is supposed to be there. It's supposed to be challenging. Being a man is not easy. Being biblically masculine is not easy. And my dad will be the first person to tell you that. When it comes to decision making, when it comes to being a husband, when it comes to making sacrifices, when it comes to giving up of yourself on a daily basis. That's not an easy thing to do. And looking at my dad do it for all of my life has just been such a good foundation when it comes to how I view myself and how I view what I want my life to look like as a man who is trying to follow after God and trying to live a biblical life. I just see the example set before me, and I have nothing but gratitude for both my dad and for my brother. But I mean, I could go on and on about the amazing things that he instilled in me. And one just quick example that I think of when it comes to just like discipline, and when we're talking about like crisis masculinity, being able to do hard things and not complaining about it. I feel like if I was to add to like when I think of doing things that are masculine, that is one of the key things. Ever since I was little, my dad has commuted 2.5+ hours to work one way and never complained about it. I remember he'd come home dog tired every day. Never complained about it. He never once said like, I can't do this anymore or anything like that. Just kept on doing it and doing it. And even if there was struggle there, he knew how to communicate it to us in a way that was, hey, I'm either stressed or, struggling, but that's not going to override my responsibility to take care of you and your mom and your siblings. And we always knew that. And that really set the tempo for me going into the workforce, because I remember, when I got my first real job, which allowed me to move out of my house or move out of my parents' house, not first real job, but first job that paid me enough money to move out of my parents' house. It was in Beverly Hills, and the commute was about an hour and a half one way. And I just remember whenever I tell people that, they would just be like so dumbfounded, like, oh, I could never do that. Or, oh, that sounds, terrible. And yeah, it is terrible. No one wants to do it. But that template that my dad set before me of, you do what you have to do in order to provide, in order to, take care of the people that you care about, in order to give to the church, in order to help people in need. So there was never really a question in my mind of like, oh, I can't do this. It was, no, this is what you should be doing. And obviously, if you don't have to commute and you're doing whatever you're doing, great. I envy that. But at the same time, when it comes down to it, if that's something that you have to do, you have to do it. And that's kind of just a mindset that I feel like my dad instilled in me from a very young age, which I think is really important for biblical masculinity, because it's not about feelings. It's about doing. And while feelings do play a part in certain aspects of how we live our life, obviously as human beings, there are things that we have to override when it comes to our emotions and our feelings in order to provide, in order to protect, and in order to further our family, loved ones, church, and all those things. So yeah, I mean, I love my dad, and we're gonna keep it going. We're gonna keep it going.
Attributing like proper family values to like a heterosexual couple with children is like just not effective. Like I think that it's obviously like a heteronormative take to be like man and woman and then a child, and that's how you create like a good family. And whether it's like a single mother, single father, or like a queer couple, like I don't think that it's necessary to like attribute men and women to like certain roles in the household. I think that it's only due to nurture those gender norms that we follow.
Male and female matters. God gives you one of those identities, you take on that role. And now you're responsible for not or for fulfilling that role. There's a masculine crisis because men are not taking responsibilities for the God-given roles that they have in society. And so when you take away the need to say, God made you this or God made you this, now you don't have to take responsibility for not fulfilling what you were called to do.
when you do that, you also take away other things that somebody else may do. If I have a woman or a partner that wants to take on certain roles and I say, hey, those are my roles that God gave me in society, now I'm suppressing that person. Like, at the end of the day, we're all human beings. You define who you are and how you behave under God. That's what God gave us, free will.
But also, like,
No. Bad. Wrong. Okay. I knew we were going to get to this. So I think this is a good time to talk about it. The transgender man starts off by saying, I think gender roles, ascribing them to male, female, it's not helpful, blah, blah, blah. He says, I think it's only due to nurture. Now, for anyone who doesn't watch 4-hour-long podcasts like I do about psychology and random stuff, you may not know what nature versus nurture is, so I'll just explain it. I know I didn't till recently. But basically the hypothesis is human nature is affected by nurture. So what we have is basically blank slate equalism. So men and women are kind of just these blank slates. We're not necessarily born with any kind of innate nature. We're kind of just these blank slates. And then nurture comes along and programs us to do all the things that we think are normal. So like on the last episode that we did about feminism, I got lots of comments and people talking about how, women wanting to fall into teaching jobs or wanting to be moms or all this stuff is all due to nurture. The way that we programmed women to think and feel and do. It's not their innate nature, it's their nurture. So he's basically saying you can nurture male or female to have any of these quote-unquote traits that we're discussing, which I think this argument is just absolutely ludicrous personally, because it just doesn't stack up with any kind of logical reasoning. So let me get this straight. I'm just going to nature versus nurture, right? There's no nature. We're all blank slates, right? So you're telling me that women who are biologically made to be able to bear children, are they not going to be by nature more inherently invested in having children than men are who can't have children? Or do we think that nurture has programmed women to want to be moms, even though they're the only one of the two genders that can have babies? Does that make sense to anybody? Does it make sense that if all due to nurture, that from the beginning of time women would have had OnlyFans and they're just going to be naked on the internet? Is that nurture? Nature? What is that exactly? Because that to me is nurture. Women wanting to be moms and wanting to be teachers and falling into jobs that they choose to do because they're more in line with their biology and the way that God designed women. That's not nurture, bro. That's nature. That is human nature. The funny part about this is you can't have nurture without nature. If we can't agree that there is a preset nature to men and women, how are you going to nurture them out of it? I mean, like, there has to be some kind of physiological, biological imprint on the way that men and women act. And we know this is true as Christians. We're made in God's image. He gives us character. He gives us those characteristics as male and female. So this whole nurture argument just falls flat on its face to me. It doesn't make sense. I mean, we really have to just look at the biology. If we're going to say that both men and women are blank slates, then that would mean that we'd have to be blank slates physically too. We can't just ignore our physical attributes and act like those don't play a part in the way that our mental attributes work. If men are stronger than women physically and they're more capable physically, does that not set a set of expectations on the way that men are going to act in society in contrast to the weaker sex physically, which is women? Or should we just pretend that women and men are both equal physically and that we should have the same set of expectations on how they're going to act mentally due to those biological expectations? Are we going to put women in the front lines of war because it's nurture? And we've nurtured women to be moms, not warriors and fighters? Does that make sense to you? Should we nurture men into having babies, even though it's not even biologically possible, even though that's what some of these professors and PhD psychologists will tell you, that men can have babies too? Right. So these are the same people that are telling you it's nurture versus nature. It's not. We have biology, we have physiology, all the things that God designed in us naturally. We don't need nurture to come along and tell women that biologically they have a disposition towards motherhood, being nurturing, being feminine, being caretakers. We don't have to tell men that they are physically stronger, they need to be providers, they are protectors. No one has to tell them these things. These are nature imprints. So this whole nurture versus nature thing, we can throw that out the window. It doesn't make sense. It's not real. Now, obviously, I think you can influence the way someone thinks about things, and you're seeing that with feminism firsthand. If anyone wants to talk about nature versus nurture, it's feminism. And it's this whole movement against men and women to convince women that they should go out and be men. That's nurture. What isn't nurture is telling them that they should be mothers. What's nurture is telling men that they need to cry all the time, that they need to be super soft, and that they need to not be leaders. What isn't nurture is telling men that they are born God-given leaders and they need to act accordingly. That's not nurture. So I could ramble on about that for quite some time. But yeah, I just think it's sad to see how willing the church is to go on tangents like this with nature versus nurture, where we're talking about, oh, I know women that are like this, or I know that women that do this. And I know men that are like this, and I know men that are like this. It's like, it doesn't matter. The exception doesn't make the rule. We have what we have been given by God, and that's just what it is. And we got to stop trying to go around it. Just like Cowboy said, choosing to make gender social construct and blank slate equalism and to ignore it is to forego your God-given responsibility as male or as female. So we really have to drill that in. It's extremely important. Like we already talked about, can't be nurture. So, we have to keep going. One thing before we move on is, again, I hope you guys were listening to them speak, because you'll hear the language. After Cowboy says, we have responsibility to male and female roles, and we have to answer to that, what do they follow up with? They say, well, what if my partner, they never say husband, wife, what if my partner says, oh, I feel like those are things that I want to do. Now you're suppressing me. Oh, God forbid, you're suppressing me. So one of the things that we've done, and I actually had a debate with my family about this a little while back, I will never be referring to my future wife as my partner, because you're falling into the egalitarian trap of, oh, this is my partner, not my husband, not my wife, it's my partner. And what they're trying to instill in you is that it can be male, male, female, female. It can be female leader, male submissive. It can be male leader, female submissive. And they're trying to make all these options for what relationships are supposed to look like. So they can't put any descriptives on it, because it has to be partner. It's egalitarian in nature. And I think when you call your partner instead of husband, instead of wife, you are stripping away so much of the responsibility, so much of the identity, so much of the beauty of the dynamic of men and women. And it's extremely sad to me when I hear people talking about, oh, it's my partner. No, it's your wife. No, it's your husband. And there is duty, there is responsibility. There are things that go with those titles. I don't see anywhere in scripture where we would use the word partner to describe a husband and wife. It is husbands, it is wives, it is mothers, it is fathers. It is not partners. There's this whole idea of 50-50 relationships where the man does some things and the woman does other things, and yada, yada, yada. That doesn't exist. We've been over this. It doesn't exist. You have male, you have female. The roles are not equal. We are equal in value. We are not equal in role. They have different functions, and we need to stay with those different functions. It's not partner. It's not blank slate. We don't do whatever we want, and no one's being oppressed. Telling women and men to fall into their gender roles oppresses no one. It is the God-given design, and that's everyone's favorite pastime these days, is claiming victim for things that they should be doing. If I can say, oh, I'm a victim because I have to provide for my family, now it just gives me an out to not do that, and that's basically what we're saying. So it's tiresome. He says... He says, that's what God gave us the freedom to do whatever we want to do. No. That is the exact opposite of what God gave us the freedom to do. God gave us the freedom to obey him and to be free from sin. Not to delve into our selfish desires and say you're oppressed by every little thing that makes you feel uncomfortable. Okay. All right, moving on. Because this is kind of where everything crescendos, and I have some final thoughts about this, but we'll see. We'll see where we go. I so much on my mind, so much that could be said, but just trying to make sure I don't keep you guys for too long.
Masculinity and power kind of go hand in hand. I mean, we're talking about peanut butter and jelly.
You know what it is? I think sometimes we got to go to work, and like if we're caught complaining about it, we're like admitting weakness. It's like you're not a man.
How does that feel?
It doesn't feel great, but that doesn't stop me from doing what I need to do. If you talk about a little bit of pressure that goes with it, yeah, there's a little bit of pressure. If you can withstand it, you become a successful man.
But what does that have to do with being a man? Like, surely like a woman can do all those things, so why even attribute it to your gender?
That's a good point, but I think also, if you're talking in terms of biological differences, generally, men are more logical, right? More reasoning, more
There you go.
I disagree.
based.
There is no scientific backing for that whatsoever.
I just think it's a commonly used stereotype. I mean, I'm
So
not.
what
I just maybe talking about, okay, you guys can say that. I
Stereotypes
think
do
more
come
about
from
me. Like, I'm more of like a logical,
Sure.
factual-based guy. Like, I have emotions, but, I don't let that deter me from what I need
We
to
don't
do,
care
like
that you
my
disagree.
reasoning.
Do you talk with people about your emotions a lot?
I mean, I have friends. I have close guy friends I can talk to.
You do?
Okay. All right. I mean, this is where I start to get angry. So I'm going to try to not go full tilt here, because this is where it starts to eat away at my soul a little bit. Not to be dramatic. So you hear the first guy, toxic masculinity and power, they go hand in hand, yada yada. I'm not even going to address that. We've been over that. It's just more emotionalism, right? He says, I have to get things done. And, there's going to be times where, you're providing, you're working really hard, you're going to work every day, it's stressful, there's responsibilities that are hard to maintain. And if you talk about those things, you're shamed for it, which is true. I would say, generally speaking, that is true. Because here's something that I've kind of learned, and it shouldn't be this way, but what should and what is are two different things. What's expected is not appreciated. And that's what we've seen firsthand in the West. Men are expected to provide, and we're expected to go by our traditional burden of performance. Everyone can acknowledge that for the most part. But because of feminism, it's warped the way that we view masculinity. And now that's not appreciated because it's taken for granted. If it's expected of you, it will not be appreciated. And I think what he's making a very valid point, which is something that we need to address as a whole. I think we see this even in the church a lot. I can think of plenty of examples where I've been in conversations and there's just a callousness to the sacrifices that men have and that men sacrifice on a daily basis. But all that being said, not really the main point, the host follows up with, well, how does that make you feel? How do you feel about that? And what have we been talking about all episode long? It's all about feel. Feelings. How do you feel about that? Did you cry today? Did you emote today? Did you talk about your feelings today? Everything is feelings. Everything. All of it. And he has a great answer. He says, it doesn't matter. I still have to go out and do these things. Does it feel good all the time? No. Is there pressure? Yes. But that doesn't deter me from doing what I know I need to do, which is a great answer and a great combat of emotional talk, because he's absolutely right. As a man, you can't be dictated by your feelings. You can't. If every day I woke up and I said, do I want to go to work today? I mean, I don't really feel like it. I'd be on the street, under the bridge of Roscoe, asking people for spare change to go buy water from the gas station. It's not about feelings. Now, feelings do play a part to play. You have to manage those and make sure that we're addressing them when they come up. And how we do that, we may need to do a whole other episode on that, but I think how we do that is a whole other conversation, rather than just letting your feelings come over you and you just roll with them. No, that's not how it works, and he gave a great answer to that. And I see that mentality a lot when it comes to career choices. I mean, that's one of the things that I think is really prevalent in schooling, is we tell men that you have to work a job that you love, because or that way you'll never work a day in your life. All this talk about escaping work, I feel like this generation of guys is all about what's the least amount of work I can do. What is the most enjoyable work I can do? I don't want to go into that field because I don't really enjoy it. Well, I don't want to work an office job because that's kind of boring. I'd get bored. All this stuff. This whole generation is about, I want to do content creating, and I want to do this, and I want to do that, and I want to do photography, and there's nothing wrong with those jobs. And we live in an age where it's feasible to try and go for some of those things. But all of it is just escapisms from work and hard realities of life. And people think that if they get a degree in a field that interests them, then they'll never work a day in their life, which is a lie. And Genesis 3 can tell you firsthand that that is a lie. If you think as a man you're going to get out of the curse of work being difficult, you're fooling yourself. You're just fooling yourself. And I think we need to be instilling in men that work isn't always supposed to be fun. There is blessings that come from work, and we can enjoy our work from the standpoint that we understand that God blessed us with work. He blessed us with the challenge of work. He's blessing us with the disciplines and the way that we grow from work. He's blessing us with the things that work provides us to be able to do, whether that's for our families, for our friends, for ourselves. But this whole ideology that we pushed onto young men about avoiding work and having fun and retiring when you're 35 to go party on a yacht, like all this stuff is BS. And we need to leave it by the wayside because it's not doing anybody any favors. Men need to work. They need to work. And work should be challenging. It should be. And I can guarantee you it will be. And I one of the things I really just wanted to point out is the people in the Christian circles that I've talked to, that when we're talking about masculinity, we bring up Jesus as the ultimate example of masculinity, which of course I agree with. However, where you start to lose me is where the only examples of Jesus's character that you want to bring up as masculine are the somber, quiet Jesus, where we try and put Jesus into this character of just this really like soft, just kind of, go with the wind kind of guy. And we list all these emotional attributes that we see in the Bible of like, oh, this is Jesus's character. And we paint this weird picture of what masculinity looks like based off these emotional, builds that we put together. Now, Jesus does have, obviously, he shows his heart. He says, I am gentle and lowly in heart. Jesus is graceful and compassionate towards people and the most loving human being, the most loving person in the universe. Those things are all true, yes. But Jesus is still exhibiting all of the things that we've talked about throughout this episode. Do we really think that Jesus wanted or felt like taking on the full wrath of God on the cross? I mean, we see in the garden when he's praying, he's sweating blood at the prospect of facing God's wrath on the cross. He wants to do the Lord's will, and he wants us to be able to have a relationship with him. But the means at which he went about doing it, he asked, is there another way, Lord? If there is another way, allow that to be, but let your will be done. Is it a complete abandonment of this ideology of, oh, I feel like this? If Jesus adopted the same idea of masculinity as these guys, we would all be in hell. If Jesus said, I don't feel like being on the cross and taking on the brunt of God's wrath for sinners, where would we all be? Where would we all be? It's not about how we feel. He says, let your will be done. I know what I have to do. And he got on the cross for our sins, the people that he made. He got on the cross for our sins to be killed the most horrific death that could ever be had, and to bear the full, unmitigated wrath of God for all the sins of humanity. I can guarantee you, he didn't feel like doing that. His desire to do the Lord's will and his desire for us to have a relationship with him overrides those feelings of doing what we need to do. So I think when we look at Jesus' character, there's a lot more there we can flesh out when it comes to who he was as a man and what masculinity looked like in his life. And those are examples that we need to be pulling from as well, not just the emotional side and the caring side and the soft and meek side of Jesus. We need to be pulling from both sides to get the complete picture of what biblical masculinity looks like. And kind of just wrapping up, I think it's just we see a very clear picture here of a blatant refusal of facts and more blank slate equalism. The guy here, he says, typically men are more, logical than women, and then everyone, oh, that's a stereotype, that's not real, that's a generalization. Yeah, it's a true generalization. And for the people that can't acknowledge that, it's just another abandonment of truth and reality and more cope. Honestly, it really is. I mean, now, granted, are there women out there that are less emotional? Sure. Are there men out there that are more emotional? Sure. But again, like I said on the feminist episode, we can't be the 10th dentist all the time. We just can't. We just can't. We have to be real about ourselves. We have to be real about reality. And we have to live in reality. But yeah, I think that's all we're going to do for today. I hope this was enlightening or helpful in any way, shape, or form. I think there's just some really important takeaways from this video. I think, one, root your masculinity in the Bible and in nothing else. I think a lot of times and I feel this for myself too, a struggle that I have is rooting my masculinity in successes and in worldly material and all of those things. And while there are aspects of being a man and being able to provide resources for the people you care about and all those things are blessings from God from doing the right things that we know we need to do from Scripture. Working hard, and the Lord blesses that. And we don't need to find our identity or our masculinity in those things. We need to find it in Scripture. We need to find it in Christ. And I think as well, just remembering there is responsibility for both men and women to adhere to our gender roles that God has assigned us, and to not fall into the trap of egalitarianism, social constructionism, all this stuff that the world tries to use to damage the church, to damage the leaders, to damage the followers, and to confuse us. There shouldn't be confusion in the church about what men do and what women do. There shouldn't be confusion there. And as much confusion as we can eliminate from the church, the better off we'll be. But I hope you guys all enjoyed this episode. I know I'm kind of all over the place and I'm, a little fired up, but hopefully you guys all enjoyed that. I appreciate you sticking around if you've stuck this far. Leave a like, leave a comment, go ahead and subscribe because there's going to be a lot more of this type of content to come. I definitely like being in the studio and recording. I know solo pod is a little bit different than the conversation episodes, but I hope you guys like both because there's going to be a good flow of both this season. So make sure you guys stick around. Again, thank you so much for watching. I'm your host, Donovan, and I will see you guys on the next episode.